I never expected a crumbling wall to change my life. My name is Sam Archer. I'm 35 years old, and I'm an architect working out of a restored Victorian house on Elm Street in Millfield, Vermont. I bought the place 4 years ago. When my engagement ended and I needed somewhere to put my hands and my attention, the house needed everything. New wiring, new plumbing, a roof that didn't apologize for itself every time it rained. I gave it all of that. In return, it gave me somewhere to be. My ex-fiancée Dana said I was too quiet. She said it near the end when she was already halfway out the door, and she said it like it explained everything. Maybe it did. I'm not a man who fills silences with noise. I never have been. I think before I speak, I work before I rest, and I've spent 4 years convincing myself that's a fine way to be. The house next door had been empty for 2 years before Claire moved in. I knew someone had bought it because I saw the moving truck on a Tuesday in April, but I was in the middle of a deadline and I didn't go over to introduce myself. I told myself I'd do it when things slowed down. Things didn't slow down. 2 weeks passed and I still hadn't knocked. She knocked first. It was a Saturday morning, early May. I was at my drafting table with coffee when I heard it. 3 knocks, confident, not apologetic. I opened the door and she was standing on my porch, dark hair pulled back, looking at me with the expression of someone who had decided to be direct and was sticking to it. "I'm Claire Hadley," she said. "I moved in next door, and I think we have a problem." I looked past her toward the fence line. The old stone wall that divided our properties had been leaning for years. I'd noticed it when I bought the house and added it to the list of things I'd eventually get to. Apparently, eventually had arrived. The wall had shifted significantly overnight. A section in the middle was bowing outward toward Claire's side, the stones at the base cracked and separating. One good rain, and it was coming down. "I'll call a mason on Monday," I said. "The forecast says rain Thursday," she said. I looked at her. She looked at me. She was right, and we both knew it. "I'll call Monday morning," I said. "First thing." She nodded. Then she looked at the wall again. "There's something in there," she said. I looked where she was pointing. Between two of the shifted stones, visible now that the wall had moved, was the edge of something, oilcloth, darkened with age, wrapped around a shape that was definitely not stone. We looked at each other. "That wasn't there before," I said. "No," she said. "It wasn't." We pulled it out together, carefully, the way you handle something old when you don't know yet what it is. The oilcloth had done its job. Whatever was inside was dry despite being sealed into a stone wall for what looked like decades. I carried it to my kitchen table and we both stood over it without touching it for a moment. Claire said, "Should we open it?" I said, "It's in my wall." She said, "It's leaning toward my property." Fair point. We opened it together. Inside were letters, 43 of them, bundled with twine that had gone brittle with age. The envelopes were addressed in 2 different handwriting styles, one careful and deliberate, one quick and slanted, no return addresses. The postmarks were from the 1960s and early 1970s. The name on the careful handwriting was Eleanor Archer, my grandmother. The name on the quick slanted handwriting was Thomas Hadley. I looked at Claire. She was already looking at me. "Hadley," I said. "My grandfather," she said quietly. "He lived in my house, before me." We stood there in my kitchen on a Saturday morning in May, looking at 43 letters between our grandparents that had been hidden in a wall between our houses for at least 50 years. Neither of us said anything for a long time. We didn't read them that day. It felt like too much to do standing up, so we didn't. Claire went home, and I stood in my kitchen for a while, and then went back to my drafting table and didn't get any work done. I kept thinking about the names, Eleanor Archer, Thomas Hadley, my grandmother, her grandfather, hidden in a wall between 2 houses on the same street for 50 years. I called my mother that evening. She was 71 and lived in Portland and had a sharp memory for most things. I asked her about Eleanor, her mother, my grandmother. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why are you asking about Eleanor?" I told her what we'd found. Another long pause. "She never talked about that time," my mother said finally. "The early 60s. I always thought it was because of the accident. Your grandfather's accident was in 1965, and after that everything was just about keeping the family going. But maybe... She stopped. Thomas Hadley. You know the name, I said. I've heard it, she said carefully. Once. She said it in her sleep, near the end. I was sitting with her and she was dreaming, I think, and she said that name. I never asked about it. A pause. I should have asked about it. I called the mason on Monday. He came Tuesday, looked at the wall, said it needed significant repair and would take 3 days of work. He also confirmed what I already suspected. The oilcloth package had been placed deliberately, wedged between specific stones in a way that suggested someone who knew what they were doing, not hidden carelessly, hidden with intention. That evening, Claire knocked again. She had a bottle of wine and a look that said she'd been thinking about the letters all weekend, same as me. We should read them, she said. I got 2 glasses. We started with the earliest postmark, 1963. Eleanor's handwriting was precise and careful, every word placed like she'd thought about it twice. Thomas's was fast and urgent, the handwriting of a man who couldn't get the words out fast enough. They had met at a library, a Tuesday afternoon in October, both reaching for the same book on architectural history. Eleanor was 24. Thomas was 26. They had talked for 2 hours and then walked outside and talked for another hour in the cold. I keep thinking about the way you said that about the Bauhaus movement, Thomas wrote in his first letter, like you were personally offended by it. I have never met anyone who had feelings about architecture the way other people have feelings about music. Eleanor wrote back, I am personally offended by the Bauhaus movement, and I intend to tell you why at length the next time we meet, if you'll allow it. Claire laughed at that, a real laugh, surprised out of her. I smiled into my wine. They met every Tuesday after that. The library, then a coffee shop, then walks along the river that ran through the east side of Millfield. The letters were what happened in between, all the things they thought of after the Tuesday was over, all the things they hadn't said yet, all the things they were still figuring out how to say. Thomas wrote about architecture with the enthusiasm of someone who had found a language for things he'd been trying to say his whole life. Eleanor wrote back with arguments and counter-arguments and occasional concessions that she marked clearly as concessions, so there would be no ambiguity about whether she was agreeing voluntarily. They disagreed about the Bauhaus movement and agreed about Saarinen and had a weeks-long correspondence about whether functionalism was a philosophy or an excuse. Reading them, it was impossible to miss how much they had enjoyed disagreeing, how much they'd enjoyed everything. I have started noticing things during the week, Eleanor wrote in a letter from February 1964, and saving them up for Tuesday. That seems significant, doesn't it? That a person can become the reason you pay attention. Claire read that one twice. Then she set it down on the table and looked at the wall of my kitchen like she was looking at something far away. She was in love with him, she said. Yes, I said. And he was in love with her. Yes. So what happened? We kept reading to find out. What happened was Thomas's family. His father ran the largest textile mill in the county and had already arranged, in the quiet way that powerful families arrange things, for Thomas to marry the daughter of a business partner. The engagement was announced in the spring of 1964. Thomas wrote to Eleanor the same day, a letter that was different from all the others, shorter, the handwriting not fast and urgent but slow and deliberate, like he was forcing himself through every word. I don't know how to write this letter, he wrote. I have started it 6 times. I keep telling myself that what I feel for you is impossible because of circumstances, and that impossible things have to be let go. I don't believe that. I'm telling myself that anyway because I don't know what else to do. Eleanor wrote back once, a single letter, the briefest of all of them. It said, I understand. I wish I didn't. I hope you find a way to be happy. I will try to do the same. And then the letters stopped until 1971. 7 years later, one more letter from Thomas. He had moved back to Millfield after his father died. His marriage was what he called a reasonable arrangement. Not unkind, not unhappy exactly, just not what the letters had been. He had heard Eleanor was living on Elm Street. He had something he needed to say, he wrote, and he hoped she would allow him to say it even now. He said, I never stopped thinking about the Bauhaus movement without thinking of you. I never read anything about architecture without wishing I could tell you about it. I know this is too late. I'm saying it anyway because it's true, and I have spent too many years not saying true things. Eleanor's reply was the last letter in the bundle, dated 2 weeks later. She said, "Come for coffee on Tuesday. I'll tell you everything I think about the Bauhaus movement. We have a lot of time to make up for." I read that letter and then set it down on the table. Claire had her hand over her mouth. "Did they?" she said. "I don't know," I said. "She was my grandmother's neighbor," Claire said. "My grandmother lived 2 houses down. She never mentioned—" She stopped. "Thomas died in 1978, 7 years after that letter." We sat with that for a while. The wine was finished. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the mason had gone home for the day, and the wall was half dismantled. A gap where the oilcloth package had been, Claire said, very quietly. They had 7 years. "Yes," I said. "And before that, they had nothing. Because of his family." "Yes." She looked at the letters on the table. "That's such a waste," she said. "All that time, all those Tuesdays they could have had." I looked at her across the table, at the paint still on her left hand that she'd missed when she cleaned up, at the way she'd laughed at Eleanor's letter about the Bauhaus movement, surprised by it, like laughter had caught her off guard, at the way she'd been sitting in my kitchen for 3 hours, and it had felt like the most natural thing in the world. I didn't say anything, but I was thinking something. I was thinking about Dana saying I was too quiet. I was thinking about 4 years in a house I'd put back together with my own hands. 4 years of evenings that were productive and orderly and entirely solitary. I was thinking about Eleanor writing that she had started saving things up for Tuesday, and how I understood exactly what that meant because I had started doing it too, and the Tuesday the first was saving things up for was the Tuesday Claire came over, and we read another letter and argued about what it meant, and the evening went 3 hours longer than it was supposed to. I didn't say any of that. I poured the last of the wine, and we sat there in my kitchen with 43 letters between our grandparents spread across the table, and neither of us said much, and it was the best evening I'd had in 4 years. We had settled into a rhythm without planning to. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, usually, though sometimes a Wednesday crept in, Claire would knock or I would knock, and whoever had wine would bring it, and we'd sit at the kitchen table with the letters. We read slowly, one or two at a time, because there was no reason to rush and plenty of reasons not to. Each letter was its own small world. A Tuesday afternoon at the library, a walk along the river, an argument about a building they'd both read about and had opposite opinions on. I noticed things about Claire the way you notice things about someone you're seeing in a specific light that keeps revealing new details. She was a landscape architect. She'd moved to Millfield to take a position with a firm that did environmental restoration work. She had grown up in Burlington and found small towns agreeable in theory, and was still working out whether she found them agreeable in practice. She made good pasta and mediocre coffee, and was perfectly aware of the coffee situation and didn't care. She had a directness that occasionally surprised people and didn't apologize for it. She also had a way of reading the letters that was different from mine. I read them like documents, carefully, looking for information, trying to build a timeline. Claire read them like stories. She'd stop at a sentence and just sit with it for a moment before she read it out loud, and the ones she chose to read out loud were always the right ones. "Listen to this," she said one evening, holding up a letter from the fall of 1963. She read, "I have been trying to explain to myself why Tuesday feels different from every other day of the week, and I have concluded that the explanation is you, which is not a particularly useful conclusion but appears to be the correct one." She set the letter down. We didn't say anything for a moment. "That's exactly it," she said finally. "That's exactly what it feels like." I looked at her. She was looking at the letter, not at me. I didn't say what I was thinking, but I was thinking something. We didn't know about Derek until the following week. Claire mentioned the letters to her mother on the phone, and her mother mentioned them to Derek, and Derek called Claire the next morning. Derek Hadley was Thomas's son from his arranged marriage. He was in his late 60s, ran a successful property development company in Burlington, and had a reputation in Millfield as a man who knew everyone who mattered and made sure they knew him. Claire had always found him difficult. She'd said that on the second evening we read letters, casually, the way you mentioned something you've known for a long time. What Claire hadn't known until her mother mentioned it on the phone was that Derek had been aware of the letters for years. Thomas had confided in his wife before he died, told her about Eleanor, about the correspondence, about the package in the wall. Thomas's wife had told Derek, and Derek had made a decision to leave the letters where they were, because what was in them, the extent of his father's feelings for another woman, the existence of a different life Thomas might have lived, was not the family story Derek wanted told. He had known the letters were in that wall for over 40 years. He had left them there. When Claire told me this, we were standing in my front yard in the early evening, and I looked at the gap in the wall where the oilcloth had been, and I thought about Eleanor placing those letters there herself, hiding them close, and I thought about Derek knowing they were there and choosing silence, the same way his grandfather's family had chosen silence 60 years earlier. "He wants them back," Claire said. "He says they're family property." "They're my family's property too," I said. "Eleanor wrote half of them." "I know," she said. "I told him that." "What did he say?" She looked at me. "He said some things are better left in the past." I thought about a Tuesday afternoon in 1963 and two people reaching for the same book. I thought about all the Tuesdays after that. I thought about 7 years of silence, and then come for coffee on Tuesday, and then 7 more years, and then nothing. "Derek's father didn't get to decide what happened with his own story," I said. "I'm not letting Derek decide what happens with it either." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." She said it the way you say something when you've just decided something, and the decision matters. Derek moved fast. Within a week, my restoration permit was flagged for a secondary review, a routine process, officially, but one that could take months and would freeze all my work in the meantime. I called my contractor, called my lawyer, called every contact I had at the town planning office. 2 days later, someone left a note on Claire's car, no name. It said, "Some things are better left in walls." Claire brought it to me that evening. We stood in my front yard and looked at it. "He's escalating," she said. "Yes," I said. "Are you sure you want to keep going?" I looked at her. She was asking me seriously, not trying to back out herself, trying to make sure I knew what I was choosing. That was the kind of person she was. I had figured that out over 4 weeks of shared wine and shared letters and evenings that started at 8 and ended at 11 without either of us noticing the time. "I'm sure," I said. She nodded. "Then let's be smart about it." Being smart about it was Claire's idea, and it was a good one. The Millfield Historical Society had been trying for years to build an archive of personal correspondence from the town's founding families. Claire contacted the director, a woman named Ruth who had the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting her whole career for exactly this phone call. And within 48 hours, the letters were formally donated to the archive and photographed and cataloged and entered into the public record. Derek could still try to suppress them, but suppressing a public historical archive is a very different thing from demanding the return of family letters from 2 people in a kitchen. He called Claire twice. She didn't answer. He called me once. I picked up. He said, "You've made an enemy." I said, "Your father spent 7 years not writing to the woman he loved because of family pressure. I'm not interested in repeating that mistake." A long silence. Then he hung up. The permit review was resolved 3 weeks later. No violations found. Restoration license reinstated. Ruth from the Historical Society had, it turned out, a very old friendship with the head of the planning committee, and she had mentioned, conversationally, that the archive's newest acquisition included correspondence that documented the history of several prominent Millfield families. The planning committee head had found this very interesting. Derek Hadley did not attend the small event the Historical Society held to mark the acquisition. His name was mentioned in the program notes as Thomas's son as part of the family history. Claire thought that was probably the part that bothered him most. I thought she was right. The wall came down in the end. Not all at once. The mason finished his assessment and told us that the original structure was too compromised to repair safely. It needed to come down entirely and be replaced or left open. Claire and I stood on either side of it on a Saturday afternoon in June and looked at each other over the remaining stones. The mason had already removed the most unstable sections. What was left was a low, broken line of old New England fieldstone, maybe 2 feet high in places, covered in moss and lichen that had been growing there since before either of us was born. "We could rebuild it," Claire said. I looked at the gap, at the way her garden and mine ran together in the space where the wall had been, her wild flowers and my kitchen herbs, the boundary between them already blurring where the seeds had crossed over during the weeks of construction. I thought about Thomas and Eleanor and all the years they'd had a wall between them, literal and otherwise. I thought about how Eleanor had hidden the letters in that wall, kept them close even when she couldn't keep him close. I thought about "come for coffee on Tuesday" and how long it had taken her to write those 5 words. "We could," I said, "or we could not." She looked at the gardens, then she looked at me. Something in her expression had shifted. Something that had been careful and contained was letting itself be seen. "Not," she said. I nodded. "Not. We had dinner in the garden that evening, at a table we put right where the wall had been. Claire made pasta. I opened wine. The wild flowers were on her side and the herbs were on mine, and in the middle there was just open ground and a table and the 2 of us, which seemed exactly right. At some point she said, "Eleanor's letter, the last one, come for coffee on Tuesday." "Yes," I said. "She waited 7 years to say that." "She did." Claire looked at her wineglass. "I've been thinking about that a lot, about how long they waited. How much time they lost because someone else decided what was possible for them." She looked up at me. "I don't want to do that." I looked at her across the table that was sitting where a wall used to be. "Neither do I said. She smiled. The kind that reaches the eyes. The kind I'd been noticing since the first Saturday morning she stood on my porch and told me we had a problem. We did have a problem. We just didn't know yet that it was the best kind. Later that evening, after the dinner plates were cleared and the wine was finished and the garden had gone dark around us, I said the thing I'd been not saying for 6 weeks. I said, "I keep thinking of Tuesdays differently now." She looked at me. "Thomas wrote that he started saving things up for Tuesdays," I said, "noticing things during the week because he had someone to tell them to." I paused. "I've been doing that." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What have you been saving up?" "A lot of things," I said. "The way the light comes through the east window at 7 in the morning. A book I read a chapter of and immediately thought you'd argue with me about it. The fact that the wildflowers on your side have been crossing into my herb section for 3 weeks and I haven't done anything about it because it looks better that way." She looked at the garden in the dark. "You notice that?" "I notice things," I said. "Occupational habit." She laughed. A quiet, real laugh. The kind she didn't give away easily. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "I've been saving things up too," she said, "since about the 3rd Tuesday." I turned my hand over and held hers. "We're not repeating their mistake," I said. "No," she said, "we're not." That was June. By August, the table in the garden was where we ate most evenings. We had stopped keeping track of whose side was whose. She came to my kitchen, I went to her porch, the food and the conversation moved freely between the 2 houses, the way the wildflowers and herbs had moved between the 2 gardens. Nobody mentioned it. It was just the way things were. By September we had built a low wooden border along where the wall had been, not to divide the space but to define it, a shared threshold rather than a boundary. Her wildflowers and my herbs grew on both sides of it. Nobody kept track of which was which anymore. Dana had said I was too quiet. I thought about that sometimes in those months. I thought about the way Claire and I could sit on the porch for an hour and not say much, and it never felt like a problem. It felt like the opposite of a problem. The silence between us was full of things: the letters, the garden, the ongoing argument about load-bearing walls that would probably never be fully resolved, the Tuesday evenings that had become the fixed point of my week. I thought about Eleanor writing, "I have started noticing things during the week and saving them up for Tuesday." That seems significant, doesn't it? That a person can become the reason you pay attention. It had seemed significant to Eleanor in 1964. It seems significant to me now. I was paying attention in a way I hadn't paid attention in years. The letters were exhibited at the Historical Society in October. Ruth had done a beautiful job with them. framed excerpts, photographs of Eleanor and Thomas from the town records, a timeline of their correspondence alongside the history of Millfield in the same years. Claire and I went together on the opening night and stood in front of the last letter, Eleanor's, "Come for coffee on Tuesday," and didn't say anything for a while. Then Claire said, "I'm glad the wall fell." "Me too," I said. "I'm glad I knocked on your door." "Me too," I said again. She took my hand. We stood there in front of her grandfather's words and my grandmother's words, and the 70-year-old story of two people who had found each other and then lost each other and then found each other again, too briefly, too late. We were not going to make that mistake. The house on Elm Street went through its final restoration in the spring. New porch boards, refinished floors, the east wall of the garden rebuilt with a gate that opened into Claire's side. Her house got a new kitchen that she designed herself, and I approved the structural drawings for, which was the most collaborative professional experience of my career and also the loudest, because Claire had opinions about load-bearing walls that differed from mine, and she was not shy about them. She was right, as it turned out. She usually was. We planted a garden together in May, mixed the seeds from both sides of the old wall line, and put them in the ground and didn't separate them by type or ownership or any other category. Just put them in and let them grow however they wanted to. I think about Eleanor sometimes when I'm at the drafting table. I think about how she saved those letters, how she must have placed them in the wall herself, kept them close even when she couldn't keep him close, how she kept going for 7 years until he came back. How she wrote that last letter, "Come for coffee on Tuesday." How sometimes the bravest thing is the simplest thing, the thing you should have said from the beginning. She was precise and funny and quietly fierce about the things she cared about. She had opinions about architecture that she stated without apology. She called things by their right names. She hid 43 letters in a stone wall and waited. And the letters found their way out eventually, the way true things do. I like to think she knew someone would find them. I like to think that was the point. One evening in September, Claire was reading on her porch, and I brought out 2 cups of coffee and sat down beside her. She looked at the cups. Then she looked at me. "It's not Tuesday," she said. "No," I said, "but I'm done waiting for Tuesday." She smiled, set down her book, took the coffee. Outside, the garden grew on both sides of where a wall used to be. The wildflowers had crossed into the herb section, and the herbs had crossed into the wildflowers, and nobody was going to do anything about it because it looked exactly right. 2 houses on Elm Street, 1 gate between them, 1 table in the middle of the garden where a boundary used to be. My grandmother had waited 7 years. I was not going to waste 7 minutes. Some problems, it turns out, are the best kind. The kind that knock on your door on a Saturday morning and change everything. The kind you spend the rest of your life grateful for. Because sometimes a crumbling wall is not a problem at all. Sometimes it's an answer to a question you didn't know you'd been asking. Claire and I had our first real argument in August, not about the letters or Derek or the permits, about a structural decision in her kitchen renovation. She wanted to open up the wall between the kitchen and the dining room. I said the wall was load-bearing. She said it wasn't. We went back and forth for 2 evenings, and then I brought my engineering reference books over, and we went through them together, and she was right and I was wrong, and I admitted it with slightly less grace than the situation deserved. She did not let me forget it. She mentioned it every time a structural question came up for the next 3 months, with the satisfied precision of someone who had been waiting to be right about something important and was making the most of it. I didn't mind. I had figured out by August that being wrong around Claire was not something to avoid. It was just part of the conversation. We disagreed about things and worked through them and came out on the other side with better answers than either of us had started with. That was how it went. It was how Thomas and Eleanor had gone too, in the letters. The Bauhaus argument had run through 4 letters and 2 Tuesday meetings, and they'd both ended up somewhere neither of them had started. I read those letters and I thought, yes, that's what it looks like when 2 people are actually paying attention to each other. My mother came to visit in September. She hadn't been to the house in 2 years, and she walked through every room and approved of what I'd done with the place. When she got to the kitchen window and looked out at the garden, no wall, just open ground, wildflowers and herbs mixed together, a table set for two in the middle. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Who else eats at that table?" "My neighbor," I said. "Claire, the Hadley girl," she said. "Yes." She looked at the table for another moment. Then she smiled, small and private, the way she smiles when she's thought of something she's not going to say. "Your grandmother would have liked that," she said. I thought about Eleanor writing, that a person can become the reason you pay attention. "I think so too," I said. One evening in September, Claire was reading on her porch, and I brought out 2 cups of coffee and sat down beside her. She looked at the cups, then she looked at me. "It's not Tuesday," she said. "No," I said, "but I'm done waiting for Tuesday." She smiled, set down her book, took the coffee. Outside, the garden grew on both sides of where a wall used to be. The wild flowers had crossed into the herb section, and the herbs had crossed into the wild flowers, and nobody was going to do anything about it, because it looked exactly right. 2 houses on Elm Street, 1 gate between them, 1 table in the middle of the garden where a boundary used to be. My grandmother had waited 7 years. I was not going to waste 7 minutes. Some problems, it turns out, are the best kind. The kind that knock on your door on a Saturday morning and change everything. The kind you spend the rest of your life grateful for. Because sometimes a crumbling wall is not a problem at all. Sometimes it's an answer to a question you didn't know you'd been asking. I think about Eleanor sometimes, about a woman who saved 43 letters in a stone wall because she couldn't save the man who wrote them, about how she placed them there with intention, wedged between specific stones, wrapped in oilcloth against the weather, not thrown away, not destroyed, kept, because some things are worth keeping even when you can't have them the way you wanted. She kept them for 30 years. The wall kept them for 20 more after that. And then a Saturday morning in May, and a leaning wall, and a woman on my porch who said, "I think we have a problem," and 50 years later, the letters found their way out. True things usually do. The garden is full this year. We planted too many things in May. Both of us, independently, had the same idea about the empty space where the wall had been, and we didn't compare notes until we were both standing there with seeds in our hands looking at each other. We laughed about it and planted all of it anyway. Too many herbs, too many wildflowers, a tomato plant that has taken over an entire corner and shows no signs of stopping. It looks exactly right. Some things, when you stop putting walls around them, grow better than you expected. Claire is on the porch right now, reading. I can see her through the window. In a few minutes I'll bring out coffee and sit down beside her, and the evening will go however it goes. 3 hours, maybe 4. Neither of us will notice when Tuesday becomes Wednesday. Eleanor would have understood that. I think she would have been glad.